everybody. Welcome to another episode of This is History from the Museum of the Great Wars, featuring the great folks at Mother Road Media, who always take the time out to come out and record us and make these kinds of things happen. Today, by the time you guys see this, it's going to be early August, probably the first week of August, and we'll be looking at the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War coming up. And what we're going to be talking about today is the story of the city of Phoenix. The city of Phoenix was a B-29. Now, how the city of Phoenix came to our museum is even probably as much of an interesting story as the fate of that aircraft. As many of you know, I manage a pawn shop, and several years, well, 6-7 years ago now, a gentleman came in and he brought in this small grouping of photos. And he didn't know much about them. All that we knew was that the one photo was the crew of the Thunderbird, which was obviously a B-29. And then there was this photo of a pilot who we had no idea who he was. And so I went home that night and got on the internet and started researching the B-29 Thunderbird. And interestingly enough, there were several B-29s named Thunderbird, there was B-17s named Thunderbird, and that sort of led to nowhere. So we went on to a website called the Warbird Information Exchange, and I posted that picture. Anyway, so after a couple of months, we got a reply from the Warbird Information Exchange, and a guy said, "Hey, where did you find that picture of Thunderbird?" And he gave me his contact information. The gentleman's name was Anthony. He lives in Maryland. And I got a hold of Anthony, and he goes, "Well, so you know, in the bottom of that photo is my grandfather. And he was aboard an airplane named the City of Phoenix, which was lost on August 8th, 1945. And he informed me that Thunderbird had been the crew's previous airplane. The pilot's name was James Shoemate. And we're going to talk a little bit about James and a little bit about the rest of the crew here in just a second. But now, armed with that information, I felt confident. And he told me that, and so I found some other photos and we framed some things up. And this was a much smaller display at the time. And about another 6 months goes by, and this lady comes into the pawn shop. And she looks up at the wall at all the military history stuff we have, and she goes, and she points to him, and she goes, "That's James." And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And she's like, "Well, my name was Julie. I was his wife's caretaker the last few years of her life here in Kingman." So she brought me a bunch of other photos and some other stuff, and told me quite a bit about Fanny, his wife, who was apparently quite the character, as most of those women from that generation were. And so, anyhow, that is how all this has come together, and we tell this story. I still talk to Anthony, the grandson of the CIC gunner, quite frequently, or the CFC gunner, sorry. And anyhow, so the story of the city of Phoenix really starts in, well, Phoenix, Arizona, of all places. James Shoemate moved here from the Midwest and worked for American Airlines. And in 1941, he got married to his woman, Fanny, who was a Phoenix native. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces shortly after the beginning of the Second World War. And like so many other people, he sort of bounced around and ultimately ended up going through B-29 pilot school. Now, the B-29 was a phenomenal airplane. When we talk about the city of Phoenix being in a B-29, we have to talk about the technological advances that that airplane offered. The B-29 was light years ahead of the B-17 or the B-24. The engines were Wright 3350 turbo compound, 18-cylinder, roughly 3,000 horsepower engines. Phenomenal power plants, a lot of teething issues, but ultimately a great engine. The airplane was pressurized, so no longer did the crew have to sit there in the freezing cold at altitude. They actually had some sort of creature comforts. Also, the guns on these were actually in remote-controlled turrets. And so that's where the people like Anthony's grandfather came into play. They were actually in a crew compartment in the center part of the aircraft, and they could actually trade control of the turrets back and forth to different gunners as different threats emerged. So the crew initially flew an airplane called Thunderbird. Interestingly enough, Thunderbird was one of the airfields where a lot of pilots trained outside of Phoenix. So that was where yet we have another Phoenix reference. In the late spring, early summer, the crew rotated back to the States, and they trained to be a lead crew. They went back, and this time James was assigned a new aircraft, and that aircraft became the city of Phoenix. They continued to fly missions. And unfortunately, their last mission would take part on August the 8th, 1945. Now, we have to put things into a little bit of historical context here. What's happening in the world in August 8th of 1945? August 6th, 1945, we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Now, one would think that that would be enough to get the Japanese to go, okay, we give up. You keep in mind that Hiroshima, while being the single most devastating single bomb strike, was not the single most devastating strike on the empire. In March, you have the Tokyo fire raids, which destroyed roughly 14 square miles of Tokyo and killed 150,000 people. The water boiled so hot in the Tokyo canals that people were literally boiled alive trying to escape the inferno. Again, the Japanese did not quit. And knowing that, so we dropped the first atomic bomb. August 8th rolls around, and it's decided the evening prior, on the 7th, that the following day there would be a maximum effort. We're not going to let up. We're going to keep pounding the Japanese until they finally get the point that they need to give up. So early on the morning of August 8th, James Shoemate gathers his crew together. They go, they have their briefings. Thousands and thousands of gallons of 115, 145 fuel are put into the airplane. It's fueled up with hundreds of gallons of oil, thousands of pounds of bombs. Now, these guys are operating with the 29th Bomb Group, 6th Bomb Squadron, which is based in Guam. On a personal side note, they took off from Northwest Airfield. Northwest Airfield is of particular interest to me personally because that's the airfield that my grandfather was working on as a Seabee with the 53rd Mobile Construction Battalion. So I oftentimes wonder how many times my grandfather would sit there, pause while aircraft were taking off, and wonder, how many of these kids are going to come back from this mission. He talked about it a lot of times about, you'd hear the airplanes taking off from early in the morning. And unfortunately, I lost him in '99, but would love to actually sit down and interview him about his time on Guam. So anyways, on the morning of August the 8th, these guys take off, and they're heading to the Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory, Target 357, which is located just outside of Tokyo, Japan. The flight is fairly uneventful. I mean, one can only imagine the conversation that they would have had amongst themselves. They would have probably stayed off the intercom and maintained proper silence like they should have. James ran a tight crew, I'm sure. But one has to think that they're discussing how long can this possibly continue. As they approach Japan, they are at roughly 20,000 feet, and approximately 30 seconds from the bomb release point, the city of Phoenix is hit by Japanese anti-aircraft fire. The round hit between the fuselage and the number 3 engine. So that's going to be right about here on a B-29 is where that round would have hit. 3 things happen immediately. The aircraft inverts, begins to spin, and begins to burn. My assumption would be that the flight controls going out to the right wing were severed. As the airplane began to spin downwards, inverted, 2 men were actually ejected from the fuselage, bailed out, got out, however that was to be. And that was actually Master Sergeant Lester Morris and Staff Sergeant Sofrano Morone. The 2 men were able to get out and parachute out. They were the only 2 men to survive the initial shoot down of the city of Phoenix. Now, what is interesting is what happens next. Morris, as the guys actually land and they get on the ground, the Japanese citizenry are angry. Their country has been bombed and bombed and bombed. They've been lied to by their leadership. And so they surround these 2 men and they're about ready to kill them. And the Japanese police show up and they go, we'll tell you what, we're going to make you guys a deal. If you crowds will disperse, you're going to allow us to interrogate these 2 men. Tomorrow we will bring one of the men to a public location and allow you to vent your frustrations on them. That's me surmising the situation. I'm sure that the conversation was a little harsher, as Japanese police tended to be. That night, both of the men were interrogated. They were interrogated. They were beaten. They were, to find out what they knew. The following morning, one of them, Lester Morris, was taken and put on a train to the Ofuna prisoner of war camp. The other gentleman, Staff Sergeant Monroe, was not. He was actually taken to a Japanese high school. He was tied to a basketball goal, and depending on which interview you believe, there's multiple interviews with people after the war for the war crimes tribunals. was beaten for 2 to 4 hours from between 400 to 800 people using fists, sticks, and feet. Interestingly enough, when one reads all of those reports, one common thing comes up. He never cried out. The man only asked for water once, which whether or not he was given is unknown. Afterwards, he was taken to a Japanese shrine and beheaded. His body was then placed among the wreckage of the aircraft in hopes that the Allies wouldn't figure out what had happened. As to Sergeant Morris, who was taken to the prisoner of war camp in Ufuna, he was actually had badly injured his leg during the bailout. His leg was saved by a Navy doctor who had been on the Bataan Death March. He was liberated on the 29th of August and sent to the USS Benevolence and returned back to the States. As for the rest of the crew, obviously the war ends on August the 14th. So we have 6 days from the end of the war from when these guys were killed. They were the last B-29 shot down by Japanese ground defenses. And I want to share something with you guys now that I don't normally bring out. It's not something I publicly share. This is something that I received from the caretaker. And this is from James's last time when he was home here in the States. And this is him with her, obviously embracing. This is a good picture of him. This is actually when he first enlisted in the military. And this is him with his wife and their baby girl. Their daughter, unfortunately, did not have a very long life. She died fairly young. And Fanny would end up coming back and would end up spending the rest of, well, not the rest of her life, but the last part of her life here in Kingman, Arizona. Now, what we have right here is actually her Army Air Corps pendant that she wore around her neck. And I'll open it up, and it actually has a photo of both of them on the inside. And according to her caretaker, she did briefly remarry to a guy who was, quote, a jerk, end quote. And she loved James with her heart and her soul till the end. We remember these guys today because their stories are so important. That's what we're doing here. And actually today we're filming this inside of this building that you're kind of like, wow, it's a little bit dark, what's going on? And we're actually inside the building that's going to become our museum. It is here on our property now. The folks from Woodside Builders have already come out and donated a bunch of time and effort working on cleaning up the inside and redoing the drywall. But I wanted to share the city of Phoenix with you because, like I said, we're at the 80th anniversary of these guys being lost. And it's important that we always remember that the mission of our museum is to tell as many stories as possible. And we are honored to have the story of James Shoemate and his crew, the city of Phoenix, and to tell their story here in our little home. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. As always, we'll see you next week.